Somewhere beneath the surface of a Louisiana marsh, an entire ecosystem is being eaten alive from the roots up, and almost nobody outside the state has any idea it's happening. A stocky rodent with bright orange teeth is chewing through the very foundation that holds the American Gulf Coast together. By the time you finish watching this creature and its relatives will have devoured enough marsh grass to open up new patches of bare, drowned earth that may never grow back the same way again. Follow this journey through the swamps, canals, and sugarcane fields of southern Louisiana, and you'll understand how a single fur trade decision from nearly a century ago spiraled into one of the most destructive biological invasions in North American history, and why scientists now consider this animal one of the greatest threats to the wetlands that protect millions of Americans from hurricanes. If you enjoy videos like this one, make sure to subscribe before we continue. The animal at the center of this crisis is the nutria, sometimes called the coypu, a semi-aquatic rodent built like a beaver, stripped of its broad tail and stretched into something leaner and more rat-like. It weighs up to 20 pounds and stretches nearly 2 feet long before you even count the thick, rounded tail that drags behind it like a snake. Its fur is dense and waterproof, brown enough to have made it wildly attractive to fur farmers in the early 20th century. But the detail that stops people in their tracks the first time they see one up close is the teeth. Bright orange, almost fluorescent against the pale, whiskered face, those enormous incisors are stained by a natural iron compound in the enamel that makes them harder than human teeth, strong enough to gnaw through thick roots, tough plant stems, and even the bark of young trees without wearing down. Native to South America, where it evolved alongside predators like jaguars, caimans, and anacondas that kept its numbers in check, this species was never supposed to become a problem in the United States at all. The story of how it got there begins with a man named Edward McIlhenny, from the same family behind the famous Tabasco pepper sauce empire, who imported nutria to Avery Island, Louisiana, in the 1930s with the goal of farming them for fur. At the time, nutria pelts were marketed as a cheaper alternative to mink and briefly became fashionable in the American fur trade. Fur farms popped up across the Gulf Coast, and for a while the business seemed promising. But the market collapsed hard and fast, prices crashed, and many farmers simply could not justify feeding and housing thousands of large, fast-breeding rodents that were no longer profitable. Rather than absorb the cost of humanely disposing of their stock, a number of them made the fateful decision to release their animals directly into the wild, assuming the swamps would either contain them or that nature would sort the problem out on its own. Others escaped during hurricanes and flooding events, when pens and enclosures were destroyed by storm surge. Either way, once these rodents reached the marshes of Louisiana, there was no putting them back. What happened next is a textbook example of what biologists call ecological release. When a species finds itself in a new environment, completely free of the predators and diseases that once controlled its numbers. Louisiana's climate turned out to be almost perfectly suited to it. Mild winters that rarely dipped cold enough to kill it off, endless miles of marsh vegetation to eat, and a near-total absence of predators large enough to take down a fully grown adult. Alligators will occasionally catch one, and so will larger birds of prey, but neither does so with enough frequency to meaningfully slow the population down. Left unchecked, a female can begin breeding at just 4 to 6 months old, and unlike most rodents native to North America, she does not stop reproducing seasonally. She can produce 2 to 3 litters a year, with as many as 13 young in a single litter, though 5 or 6 is more typical. Run that math across generations, and you get a growth curve that looks less like a wildlife success story and more like a slow-motion explosion, one that turned a handful of escaped fur farm animals into a population estimated in the millions across the Gulf Coast within just a few decades. The reason this species is so uniquely destructive comes down to how it eats, and this is the detail that separates it from almost every other herbivore in the marsh. Native grazers like muskrats tend to eat the above-ground portions of marsh plants, the stems and leaves, which allows the root systems to survive and regrow. Nutria dig down and eat the roots and rhizomes directly, the very structures that hold the soil together and let the plant regenerate season after season. When they move through a section of marsh in large numbers, they don't just graze it, they strip it bare down to the mud, killing the vegetation outright and leaving nothing behind to hold the sediment in place. Scientists have a specific term for the bald, waterlogged scars this creates: an eat-out, a patch of marsh so thoroughly devoured that it collapses into open water, sometimes permanently. Once that happens, the land doesn't simply recover the following spring the way it would after ordinary grazing. The soil that once anchored the ecosystem washes away with the tides, and what used to be productive wetland becomes a shallow, lifeless pond. To understand why that matters so much, you have to understand what these wetlands actually do for the people who live near them. They are not just scenic backdrops for fishing trips. They are one of the most important natural storm barriers in North America. Every mile of healthy marsh between the open Gulf of Mexico and a populated area helps reduce storm surge during a hurricane, acting like a natural sponge that slows incoming water before it reaches homes, roads, and cities. Louisiana has already lost an enormous share of its coastline over the past century to a combination of factors: river levee systems that block natural sediment from replenishing the coast, oil and gas canal dredging that fragments the wetlands, rising sea levels, and land subsidence. Nutria didn't start this crisis, but they've become one of its most aggressive accelerants, chewing away at what remains and preventing already degraded areas from ever bouncing back. Researchers with Louisiana's Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority have documented tens of thousands of acres of direct damage tied to this single species, converting healthy marsh into open water faster than almost any other biological cause on record. The economic toll ripples out far beyond the marsh itself. These wetlands support one of the most productive commercial fishing and shrimping industries in the entire country, an industry that depends on healthy marsh grass as nursery habitat for shrimp, crabs, and juvenile fish. Turn that marsh into bare mud and open water, and you are quite literally eating away at the foundation of a billion-dollar seafood economy. Sugarcane and rice farmers in the region report their own losses too, since these rodents happily raid agricultural fields bordering wetland habitat, gnawing through cane stalks and rice shoots with the same efficiency they apply to native plants. Levees and flood control infrastructure haven't been spared either. As prolific burrowers, they dig extensive tunnel systems into the banks of canals and water control structures in search of shelter, and those tunnels can weaken the flood defenses that entire communities depend on to survive hurricane season. In a state where a single levee failure can mean the difference between a wet basement and a flooded neighborhood, an animal that undermines those structures from below isn't a minor nuisance. It's a genuine public safety concern. Faced with a crisis of this scale, Louisiana has tried almost everything to bring the population under control. In the early 2000s, the state launched the coast-wide Nutria control program, paying licensed trappers a bounty for every tail they turn in, a direct financial incentive designed to encourage large-scale removal. The program has proven effective in specific zones, with hundreds of thousands of animals removed some years, and researchers have documented measurable slowdowns in marsh loss wherever trapping is concentrated. But covering the entirety of coastal Louisiana, millions of acres of remote marsh, swamp, and bayou, remains an enormous logistical and financial challenge, and funding fluctuates with state budgets in ways the animal's breeding rate simply does not. Some wildlife managers have experimented with promoting the meat itself as a lean, sustainably harvested protein, hoping consumer demand might help fund larger removal efforts, though cultural resistance to eating what most people still picture as a giant swamp rat has limited how far that idea can go. What makes this invasion especially unsettling is that Louisiana is not an isolated case. Nutria have established populations in parts of the Chesapeake Bay region, the Pacific Northwest, and scattered wetlands across the southeastern United States, with agencies in states like Maryland running their own eradication campaigns with mixed results. Climate change adds another layer of urgency, since survival and reproduction are limited mainly by cold winter temperatures, and as winters across the southern and mid-Atlantic United States keep trending milder, the range of habitat capable of sustaining year-round populations is expected to expand rather than shrink. A species once confined mostly to the Gulf Coast could plausibly push its range further north and west in the coming decades, carrying the same eat-out destruction into wetlands that have never had to deal with it before. Standing in a Louisiana marsh today, the danger is easy to miss at first glance. The water looks calm, herons and egrets still wade through the shallows, and the horizon still shows patches of green grass swaying in the Gulf breeze. But scattered throughout that same landscape are the telltale bald patches, quiet expanses of open water where thriving wetland used to stand, expanding a little further with every breeding season. The animal itself rarely draws attention, moving low and silent through the reeds, more likely to slip beneath the surface than confront anything that gets too close. Yet the combined weight of millions of these creatures, each one chewing through roots a few ounces at a time, has reshaped the Louisiana coastline faster than hurricanes and rising seas alone ever could. The most dangerous invasive species are rarely the ones that look ferocious. Sometimes the greatest threat to an entire coastline comes from something small, orange-toothed, and quietly, relentlessly hungry. If this story opened your eyes to a threat you'd never heard of, subscribe for more of nature's hidden wars.